What if I told you that both Portugal and Japan had a fierce rivalry caused by a disdainful hatred for each other that continued into the 1960s? I hope you'd be surprised, and rightfully so, since that never happened. In actuality, it was Portugal and India who had a small scuffle for old territories held from the Kingdom of Portugal. It wasn't too serious or important, lasting for only 2 days from the 17th to 19th of December 1961. You may find yourself asking why I made this video. To which I'd say, why are you watching? Anyways, following India's independence from the British Empire in 1947, they were eager to do the same with Portugal, who held enclaves such as Goa, Daman and Diu, and Dadra and Nagar Haveli, which were collectively known as the Estado da India. Goa, Daman, and Diu covered an area of around 1,540 square miles and held a population of 637,591. The movement for revolution started 40 years prior to the decolonization all the way back in the 1920s. Both non-violent and violent methods of protesting were used, with armed groups such as the Azad Gomantak Dal, meaning the Free Goa Party, and the United Front of Goans conducted violent attacks aimed at weakening Portuguese rule in Goa. These groups were supported by the Indian government, giving them full financial, logistic, and even armament support. The severity of these attacks were explained by Captain Carlos Azeredo, who had previously fought for Portugal in both Angola and Guinea, said, "To the contrary to what is being said, the most evolved guerrilla warfare which our armed forces encountered was in Goa. The major part of the freedom fighters in Azad Gomantak Dal were not Goans. Many had fought in the British Army under General Montgomery against the Germans." Diplomatic efforts were made on multiple different accounts to annex Goa, which never came into fruition. Portugal asserted that its territory on the Indian subcontinent was not a colony but part of metropolitan Portugal, and hence its transfer was non-negotiable, and that India had no rights to this territory because the Republic of India did not exist at that time when Goa came under Portuguese rule in 1510. After these diplomatic attempts failed, India felt repulsed by the lack of support of their claims by other nations and ultimately Portugal for not accepting them. Because of this, India started to plan an offensive, codenamed Operation Vijay. The American response to this was to warn India that if and when India's armed action in Goa was brought to the UN Security Council, it could expect no support from the US delegation. The hostilities between India and Portugal started 7 years before the conflict over Goa, when Dadra and Nagar Haveli were invaded and occupied by pro-Indian forces with the support of the Indian authorities. Dadra and Nagar Haveli were 2 Portuguese landlocked exclaves of the Daman district, totally surrounded by Indian territory. The connection between the exclaves and the coastal territory of Daman had to be made by crossing about 20 kilometers of Indian territory. Dadra and Nagar Haveli did not have any Portuguese military garrison, but only police forces. Requests to reinforce the exclaves were refused by India. With no hope of fighting this battle, the Portuguese administrator and police forces in Nagar Haveli eventually surrendered to the Indian police forces on 11 August 1954. After Portugal appealed to the International Court of Justice, the outcome was that even though the territories were rightfully Portuguese, India also had the right to deny the Portuguese forces to pass through Indian land. In regards to Goa, civilians were being evacuated from the area, as the Indian military was readily prepared for the annexation of Goa. The official Goa liberation began on 18th December with the 15th Para Brigade of the Indian Army moving into Goa in 3 columns. Operation Vijay was now in motion, with naval and air raids being conducted. Imprisoned Indian officials that were being kept by the Portuguese were freed. After realizing the Portuguese army was heavily unequipped and outnumbered, the Portuguese president called for a scorched earth policy, which meant that Goa should be destroyed before it was to be given up. But the Governor-General Silva decided to surrender to the Indian forces, considering his force's inferior position, canceling the order made by President Antonio Salazar. The former surrender was made on 19th December 1961. Subsequently ending 451 years of Portuguese rule over Goa. After the fall of Goa, Lisbon terminated all diplomatic relations with India and refused to recognize the incorporation of its former possessions into the Indian Republic. It was only in 1974 did Portugal recognize Goa as a part of India and resume diplomatic relations. Although many countries supported India's right to annex Goa, some others protested against India's use of military force, the right of colonized nations to be free notwithstanding. The USSR were major supporters of India in this matter and also vetoed a resolution condemning the Indian invasion in the UN Security Council. Empires were slowly losing their place in the world. Even world powers such as Britain were forced to surrender territories. Portugal was not an exception and reluctantly had to follow suit. Thank you for watching this Everything History video. We hope you enjoyed the video or at least learnt a thing or two. What do you make of the annexation of Goa, and what would you like to see next on the channel? Let us know in the comments below.